For 28 years, my father looked at me like I was a stain on his freshly pressed shirt. He never said it outright at dinner parties, but the implication was always there. I was the affair child, the living receipt of my mother's betrayal. I took the DNA test to finally shut him up, to prove I belonged in this family. Instead, I learned that his cruelty wasn't about punishment. It was about keeping a secret that cost more than just money. I live my life in a series of carefully constructed compartments. In Philadelphia, I am Sarah Hayes, the 33-year-old logistical coordinator for a mid-sized import firm. I am reliable, organized, and quietly pleasant. My colleagues know that I like my coffee black, that I run along the Schuylkill River on Tuesday mornings, and that I never talk about my family. They assume it is because I am private, or perhaps because I am boring. They do not know that my silence is a structural necessity, a load-bearing wall that keeps the rest of my existence from collapsing. I have spent the last decade perfecting the art of being uninteresting. If you are uninteresting, people do not ask questions. If they do not ask questions, you do not have to lie, and you do not have to tell the truth that makes them look at you with that particular blend of pity and morbid curiosity. I have dated men who were kind and men who were exciting, but I always ended things the moment the relationship threatened to cross the threshold into intimacy. The second a man asked to meet my parents, or wondered why I never went home for Christmas, I would initiate a polite, bloodless breakup. I could not risk the exposure. I could not risk them seeing me the way Martin Hayes saw me. Then came the phone call that shattered my carefully curated peace. It was a Tuesday afternoon in October. The sky outside my office window was a bruised purple, threatening rain. When my phone buzzed against the mahogany desk, the name on the screen made my stomach turn over. Denise, my mother's sister. Denise never called. In the Hayes family doctrine, communication was an admission of need, and need was a weakness. I answered on the third ring. "Sarah," Denise said. Her voice was tight, vibrating with a frequency of panic I had never heard from her before. "It is your mother. She collapsed at the Preservation Society luncheon. They have taken her to Briar Glen Memorial." The words did not land with emotional weight immediately. They hit me like data points. Mother, collapse, hospital. Then the reality seeped in like ice water. "Is she alive?" I asked. "She is stable," Denise said. "It looks like a cardiac event. But Sarah, you need to come. Now." I did not want to go. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to hang up, to stay in my safe, quiet apartment where I was just Sarah, the logistics coordinator. But I thought of my mother. I thought of Elaine Hayes, a woman who had spent 30 years shrinking herself to fit into the sliver of space my father allowed her. "I will be there in 3 hours," I said. The drive from Philadelphia to Briar Glen was a journey backward in time. As the highway stretched out and the industrial gray gave way to the burning reds and oranges of New England autumn, I felt the familiar armor descend over my chest. Briar Glen was not just a town. It was a fortress of old money and older secrets, a place where reputation was a currency more valuable than gold. It was a town of manicured lawns and high hedges, designed to keep people out and keep secrets in. I pulled my sedan into the visitor lot of the hospital just as the sun was dipping below the horizon. The hospital was a sprawling brick complex, funded largely by the checks written at the very galas my parents attended. I walked through the automatic doors, the smell of antiseptic and floor wax triggering a phantom headache. I found the cardiac wing on the 4th floor. The waiting room was plush, carpeted in muted beige, looking more like a hotel lobby than a medical facility, and standing near the nurse's station, looking entirely out of place in his bespoke charcoal suit, was my father. Martin Hayes did not look like a man whose wife had just suffered a heart attack. He looked like a man whose schedule had been inconveniently disrupted. He was typing on his phone, his jaw set in a hard line. He was 62 years old, but he had the vitality of a man who fed on control. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, his posture rigid. I approached him slowly. "Dad," I said. He stopped typing. He did not turn to face me immediately. He finished his sentence, hit send, and then slid the phone into his breast pocket. Only then did he pivot. His eyes, a pale, icy blue, swept over me with a look of profound distaste. It was the look one might give to a stranger who had tracked mud onto a Persian rug. "What are you doing here?" he asked. His voice was low, smooth, and utterly devoid of warmth. "Denise called me," I said, keeping my voice steady. "She said Mom collapsed." "Denise is dramatic," Martin said. He adjusted his cufflinks. "Your mother is undergoing tests. There is no need for a spectacle." "I am not a spectacle." I said, "I am her daughter." Martin let out a short, sharp breath through his nose. It was a sound of derision. "You are certainly here for attention. Sarah, you always are. Do not think I do not know how this works. You smell a crisis, and you come running, hoping to play the concerned child. It is breathless, and it is unnecessary." It was the same script he had been reading from since I was 5 years old. The narrative never changed. I was the interloper, the mistake, the constant reminder of a sin I had not committed. "Is she awake?" I asked, ignoring his barb. "She is resting," he said. "You should go back to the city. You do not belong here. I am not leaving until I see her." We stood in a standoff, 2 statues in the middle of a busy corridor. Nurses bustled past us, their rubber-soled shoes squeaking on the linoleum. I refused to look away. If I looked away, he won. That was the rule. "Fine," he said, turning his back on me. "But do not expect a warm reception. She needs rest, not your drama." We walked into the room. My mother looked small in the hospital bed. Elaine Hayes was a woman who was defined by her elegance, by her ability to present a flawless surface to the world. Seeing her like this, pale and hooked up to monitors, with her hair unbrushed against the pillow, felt like a violation of her privacy. She opened her eyes as we entered. When she saw me, a flicker of something passed across her face. It was not joy. Exactly. It was relief, followed instantly by fear. She looked at Martin, then back at me. "Sarah," she whispered. Her voice was raspy. "Hi, Mom," I said. I moved to the side of the bed. Taking her hand, it felt cold and dry, like parchment paper. "I told her not to come," Martin said from the foot of the bed. He stood with his arms crossed. Acting as a sentinel, "I wanted her to come," my mother said. The defiance in her voice was weak, but it was there. She squeezed my hand. It was a desperate, pulsing squeeze, like she was trying to tap out a code I had forgotten how to read. A nurse entered the room, carrying a clipboard. She was young, efficient, and clearly unaware of the tension that made the air in the room feel thick enough to choke on. "Good evening," the nurse said brightly. "I just need to update Mrs. Hayes's file with some family history. We are seeing some irregularities in the blood work and want to rule out hereditary conditions." She looked at me. "You are the daughter?" "Yes," I said. "Okay, great," the nurse said, pen poised. "Does your father have a history of cardiac arrhythmia or high blood pressure?" I opened my mouth to speak, but Martin's voice cut through the air like a guillotine blade. "That is irrelevant," he said. The nurse blinked, confused. "I am sorry? We need the biological family history to—" "I understand what you need," Martin said. He did not look at me. He looked straight at the nurse, his expression flat and terrifyingly calm. "But her history is not ours." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a physical blow. I had heard variations of this my entire life. I had been called the affair child, the bastard, the mistake. But to have him say it here, in a hospital room, to a stranger, while my mother lay hooked to a heart monitor, was a new level of cruelty. The nurse looked from Martin to me, her cheeks flushing pink. "Oh," she stammered, "I apologize. I assumed—" "There is no need to assume," Martin said. "Just treat my wife. Leave the girl out of it." I stood frozen. My hand was still in my mother's. She squeezed it again, harder this time. I looked down at her. Her eyes were wet. She was not looking at Martin. She was looking at me, and in her gaze I saw an apology so profound and so helpless that it broke my heart more than Martin's cruelty ever could. She could not defend me. She never had. The price of her comfort was her silence. "I need some air," I said. I dropped my mother's hand and walked out of the room. I did not run, because Martin Hayes would have enjoyed seeing me run. I walked with a measured, steady pace until I reached the elevator bank. Only then did I let my shoulders slump. I pressed my forehead against the cool metal of the elevator doors and tried to remember how to breathe. Memories assaulted me. They did not come as a flood, but as flashes, sharp and distinct. I was 7 years old. It was Christmas morning. There were piles of gifts under the tree, wrapped in gold and silver paper. I sat at the edge of the room, waiting. Martin handed a box to my mother. Diamond earrings. He handed a box to himself. A new watch. He sat in his armchair, drinking coffee. I waited and waited. Finally, my mother stood up, her face pale, and went to the closet. She pulled out a generic, unwrapped toy set from the pharmacy. "Santa must have left this one in the back," she had said, her voice trembling. Martin had not even looked up from his newspaper. I was 12, family photo day. The photographer arranged us on the lawn. Martin, Elaine, and me, closer together, the photographer had said. Martin had taken a step to the left, away from me. "She is fine where she is," he had said. In the final print, which hung in the hallway for years, there was a visible gap between my parents and me, a 6-inch demilitarized zone that no one ever acknowledged. I was 16. I had won a debate championship. I ran home, bursting with pride, placing the trophy on the kitchen counter. Martin walked in, poured a glass of water, and pushed the trophy aside to make room for his coaster. "Do not expect applause for mediocrity," he had said, "and do not think achievement washes away what you are. You are proof of a lie. Sarah, nothing you do changes that." The elevator dinged. Snapping me back to the present, I stepped in and rode it down to the cafeteria. I needed coffee. I needed to sanitize my mind. I bought a cup of black coffee that tasted like burnt rubber and sat at a plastic table in the corner. 10 minutes later, my Aunt Denise appeared. She looked frazzled, her coat buttoned wrong, her hair windblown. "Sarah," she said, sliding into the chair opposite me, "I am so glad you came. How is she?" "She is awake." I said, "Martin is with her." Denise grimaced. "Ah, Martin. I assume he was his usual charming self?" "He told the nurse my medical history is irrelevant because I am not family," I said, blowing on the coffee. Denise sighed, rubbing her temples. "He is a bastard. He always has been, but he is scared. Sarah, Elaine's health. She is the only thing he actually cares about, in his own twisted way. I do not think he cares about anyone," I said. Denise reached across the table and patted my hand. She was the only person in the family who touched me. She was younger than Elaine, flightier, less beaten down by the social expectations of Briar Glen. "I need to tell you something," I said. I hesitated, unsure if I was making something out of nothing. When I was in the room, before Martin kicked me out emotionally, I saw the chart, the emergency intake form. "What about it?" "It listed Mom's blood type as a positive," I said. Denise frowned. So, I am O negative," I said, "and I remember when I had my tonsils out when I was 10. I remember the doctor joking about me being a universal donor, and I remember seeing my birth certificate form once, years ago. It said Martin is B positive." Denise stared at me, her brow furrowed as she did the mental math. "If Elaine is A and Martin is B, then they could have an O child," I said. "That is the one combination that works. But Martin swears I am not his. He swears Mom had an affair. If Mom is A and the mystery affair partner was, well, almost anything. I could be O, but," Denise prompted, "but if Martin is so sure I am not his, why does the biology actually work?" I asked. And there was something else on the chart, a note about previous transfusions. It listed a date in 1992. Mom never had surgery in 92. Denise went quiet. She looked around the cafeteria, as if checking for eavesdroppers. Sarah, there are things about that time. Things people did not talk about. Like what? Denise lowered her voice. Before you were born, about a year before Elaine got pregnant, Martin was working at Harrow and Pike Financial. He was on the fast track, vice president by 30. Then, one day, he just quit. He quit? I asked. Martin never quit anything. He considered quitting a moral failing. He resigned effective immediately, citing personal reasons. He was unemployed for 6 months. He sat in the house with the blinds drawn. Then, suddenly, he was hired back as a consultant with double the salary, and Elaine announced she was pregnant with you a month later. I stared at her. What are you saying? I am saying that the timeline is messy, Denise said. And Martin's hatred of you. It has always felt too specific, too performative, like he is trying to convince himself as much as anyone else. I finished my coffee. It had gone cold. I need to go to the house. I said, why? I need to get Mom's insurance papers. She told me they are in the desk in the study, but I want to look at something else. Sarah, be careful, Denise warned. Martin is not stable right now. I will be fast, I said. He is here with her. I have an hour. I drove to the house I grew up in. It was a large, colonial-style home set back from the road. Shrouded in oak trees, it looked exactly as it had when I left at 18. Imposing, pristine, and utterly devoid of life. I let myself in with the key I had kept on my ring for 15 years, mostly out of habit. The air inside was stale, smelling of lemon polish and silence. I walked through the foyer, past the living room where no one was ever allowed to sit, and into Martin's study. The study was a shrine to Martin's ego. Mahogany bookshelves lined the walls, filled with leather-bound books he had never read. His desk was a massive slab of dark wood, clear of any clutter. I went to the side drawer where I knew they kept the household files. It was unlocked. I found the insurance folder quickly. I pulled it out, but as I did, I noticed a smaller, thinner envelope tucked way in the back, wedged between the file frame and the wood of the drawer. It was an old envelope, the paper yellowed with age. On the front, in my mother's handwriting, were the words, "Private, do not file." My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew I should not open it. I knew that whatever was in here was likely to hurt me, but the curiosity was a physical pull. I opened the envelope. Inside were 3 receipts. They were faded, printed on that old dot matrix paper with the perforated edges. They were from a place called Larkspur Women's Clinic. I looked at the dates. February 1993, March 1993, April 1993. I was born in January of 1994. These dates were from the months immediately preceding my conception. I looked closer at the itemized list on the receipts. The codes were alphanumeric gibberish to me. IVF402, Q-screen, Don Cell, but the totals were staggering. $5,000, $7,000. My mother had never mentioned a clinic. The story had always been that I was a surprise, a mistake, an affair baby that happened because she was reckless. Why would she have receipts for fertility treatments if I was an accident? And why would an affair baby require a clinic? I took out my phone and snapped photos of the receipts. Then I shoved them back into the envelope and pushed it deep into the back of the drawer, exactly where I had found it. I grabbed the insurance folder and turned to leave. I heard the front door open. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in my chest. Martin. He was back early. I could not go out the front. The study was off the main hallway. If I walked out now, I would run right into him. I stepped back, pressing myself into the corner of the room, behind the heavy velvet drapes of the window. It was a childish hiding spot, but I had no other option. I heard his heavy footsteps on the hardwood floor. He was not alone. He was on the phone. I walked into the kitchen, his voice echoing down the hall. He sounded winded, agitated. "No. You listen to me," he hissed. I heard the clinking of glass. He was pouring a drink. "She is here. Sarah is here." A pause. "I do not know how long she is staying, but she was asking questions at the hospital. The nurse was asking about history. It was too close. Another pause. I know what the agreement was. Martin snapped. His voice dropped lower. Vibrating with a controlled panic I had never heard from him. I have kept my end. I have treated her exactly as required. But she is 33 years old now. She is not a child I can send to her room. He slammed something down on the counter. If she starts digging, if she finds out the truth, it is not just my reputation. Grant, it is everything. It is the money. It is the trust. It is over. I held my breath. My hands trembling so hard, I almost dropped the insurance folder. He wasn't talking about an affair. He wasn't talking about infidelity. He was talking about an agreement. I waited until I heard him walk out of the kitchen and up the stairs to the master bedroom. Then, moving with the silence of a ghost, I slipped out of the study, through the foyer, and out the front door. I sat in my car for a long time before I started the engine. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles were white. For 28 years, I had believed that my father hated me because I was a symbol of his wife's betrayal. I had believed his cruelty was a moral judgment. But as I looked back at the dark windows of the house, I realized I had been wrong. He didn't hate me because I was a sin. He hated me because I was a liability. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. I felt dangerous. I put the car in gear and drove away. I had receipts to decode. The morning sun in Briar Glen was deceptive. It was bright and crisp, casting long, sharp shadows across the floor of the guest room in Denise's house where I had spent a sleepless night. I sat cross-legged on the bed, the duvet tangled around my waist, staring at the photos on my phone. I had zoomed in on the receipts until the pixels blurred. February 3rd, 1993. Code 15, F402. March 15th, 1993. Code DONSEL. April 10th, 1993. Code Q screen. I am not a doctor, but I am a logistics coordinator. I understand codes. I understand that systems have languages. And even if you do not speak the dialect, you can recognize the syntax of order. These were not the receipts of a woman having a reckless, passionate affair that resulted in an accidental pregnancy. These were the receipts of a woman undergoing a systematic, scheduled medical process. I tried to tell myself I was overreacting. I tried to summon the voice of reason that had kept me safe and boring in Philadelphia for 10 years. You are looking for a conspiracy because it is easier than accepting that your mother cheated. The voice said, you want to exonerate her because she is sick, but the dates did not lie. If I was born in January of 1994, a conception date in April of 1993 was mathematically perfect, and if my mother was visiting a fertility clinic in April of 1993, then my conception was not an accident, it was an appointment. I heard a knock on the door, and Denise peeked in. She held 2 mugs of coffee, her face devoid of makeup, looking every day of her 58 years. You are awake, she said, setting the mugs on the nightstand. I did not sleep, I said. I turned the phone screen toward her. Denise, what does Doncel mean? Denise froze. She looked at the phone, then at me. She sat down on the edge of the bed, her shoulders slumping as if the weight of the wool cardigan she wore was suddenly too much to bear. I do not know. Sarah, I am not a medical billing expert. You are lying. I said, it was not an accusation, just a statement of fact. You know something. You told me last night that Martin's behavior was performative. You told me the timeline was messy. Mom was going to a clinic called Larkspur. Denise sighed, wrapping her hands around the warm ceramic mug. Elaine never told me the whole story. She said quietly, but she did tell me once, years ago, that she and Martin had needed help. Help? To get pregnant, Denise said. She was drunk. It was the only time I ever saw your mother truly drunk. It was right after you turned 2. Martin had been awful at your birthday party. He had refused to hold you for the cake cutting. Elaine came over here afterwards, crying. She said, I went through hell to give him what he wanted, and he still looks at her like she's a stranger. I felt a cold prickle at the base of my neck. To give him what he wanted, I assumed she meant IVF. Denise continued, I assumed they had trouble conceiving, and the hormones made her emotional. And Martin was just being his usual cold self because he could not handle the idea that his virility needed a boost. Men like Martin are fragile that way. But he calls me the affair child. I said, if they did, IVF, he would know I am his. You do not accidentally use the wrong sperm in a marriage unless… Unless what? Denise asked. Unless the help they got involved a third party. I said. Denise shook her head violently. No, Elaine would never. And Martin? Martin is obsessed with bloodlines. He talks about the Hayes legacy like he is royalty. He would never agree to a donor. That is why the affair story stuck. Sarah, because it is the only thing that explains why he hates you. If Elaine cheated, his ego is bruised, but his blood is pure. If you are a donor baby, then I am a product he paid for but decided to return. I finished. I stood up. I need a DNA test. Sarah, Denise warned. I am not doing it for revenge, I said, walking to my suitcase to find fresh clothes. I am doing it for clarity. I need one fact, just one single, immutable fact that cannot be argued away in Martin's house. He controls the narrative. He controls the money. He controls Mom. But he cannot control biology. I ordered the kit online before I even brushed my teeth. I paid for the expedited shipping and the priority processing. It would take days, maybe a week. In the meantime, I had to exist in the same town as the man who claimed I was nothing. I spent the afternoon at the hospital. The atmosphere in the cardiac wing was heavy, the air pressurized with the silence of sick people. Martin was there, of course. He sat in the armchair by the window, reading the Wall Street Journal, ignoring my mother's attempts at conversation. When I entered, he glanced up, his lip curling slightly. You are still here. I am staying until she is discharged, I said. He turned back to his paper. A waste of time. She is recovering. I ignored him and pulled a chair up to my mother's bedside. She looked better today, the color returning to her cheeks, but her eyes were darting nervously between Martin and me. I met Judy Kerr in the hallway an hour later. Judy was my mother's oldest friend. A woman who wore silk scarves and smelled of expensive perfume and gin. She had been a fixture of my childhood, a kind but distant aunt figure who always seemed to be watching Martin with a wary eye. Sarah, she said, embracing me, you look wonderful. City life suits you. You look tough. I do not feel tough. I said. Judy steered me toward the vending machines at the end of the hall. How is he treating you? She asked, tilting her head toward the room we had just left. Like a virus, I said. Judy nodded, her expression tightening. He is a small, cruel man. I have told Elaine to leave him 1,000 times, but she is afraid. Afraid of what? Of the silence, Judy said. She looked around, then lowered her voice. You know, I remember when she was pregnant with you. It should have been the happiest time of her life. She had wanted a baby for so long, but I found her in the parking lot of the country club one afternoon, sitting in her car, sobbing. Why? I asked. She was shaking. Judy said, she kept saying, he will punish her forever for what I did not even do. I asked her what she meant, if she meant an affair. She looked at me like I was crazy. She said, I never touched another man. Judy, I did exactly what I was told. I stared at Judy. What she was told? That is what she said. Judy confirmed. I thought maybe she meant Martin forced her to quit her job, or forced her to dress a certain way. He was always controlling, but looking back, it sounded like she was following orders. The phrase stuck in my mind like a burr. I did exactly what I was told. The next morning, I drove to the address on the old receipts. The building that had once housed Larkspur Women's Clinic was now a gleaming structure of glass and steel, rebranded as Juniper Reproductive Health. The logo was a stylized green leaf, sleek and modern. It looked like a place where you went to buy expensive vitamins, not a place where secrets were buried. I walked up to the reception desk. The woman behind the counter was young, her name tag reading Courtney. She gave me a practiced customer service smile. "Hi there. How can we help you today?" "I am looking for some old records." I said, "My mother was a patient here in the 90s. Her name is Elaine Hayes." Courtney's fingers flew across her keyboard. "Hayes. I am not seeing anything in our digital system, but we only digitized back to 2005 after the merger." "The merger?" "Yes. When Juniper acquired the practice," she said, "who was the physician?" I pulled up the photo of the receipt on my phone. The receipt said Larkspur Women's Clinic. When I said the name, Courtney's smile faltered. It was a subtle shift, a tightening of the corners of her mouth. "Oh," she said, "Larkspur. Is that a problem?" I asked. "No, no problem," she said, her voice raising an octave. "It is just, those records are archived off-site. When the ownership changed, a lot of the older files were consolidated. We do not have access to them here." "Consolidated," I repeated. "Does that mean destroyed?" "I am not sure," she said. "You would have to contact the legal department. I can give you an email address." She wrote down an email address on a sticky note and handed it to me. Her hand was shaking slightly. "Thank you, Courtney," I said. I walked away, but I did not leave the building. I went to the coffee shop in the lobby and sat down, watching the entrance. I waited for 40 minutes. I watched doctors come and go, women with hopeful faces and swollen bellies, couples holding hands tightly. Then I saw a woman walk out of the employee entrance. She was older, maybe 60, wearing scrubs that looked lived in. She was carrying a tote bag and looking tired. I recognized her from the staff directory photo on the wall near the elevator. Mara Dorsey, billing coordinator. I followed her out to the parking lot. "Excuse me," I called out. "Ms. Dorsey?" She turned, her keys in her hand. Her face was guarded, the universal expression of a woman who does not want to be sold anything. "Yes? My name is Sarah Hayes," I said. "My mother is Elaine Hayes." I saw the recognition hit her eyes. It was instant. She took a step back, her grip on her purse tightening. "I cannot talk to you," she said. "You need to go through the front desk." I went to the front desk, I said, stepping closer but keeping my hands visible, non-threatening. They gave me the runaround. They told me the Larkspur files were consolidated. "They were," Mara said sharply. "Please leave me alone. I found receipts." "Mara," I said, "from 1993. Codes that do not make sense. My father calls me an affair child, but the dates say I was a clinic baby. I just want to know why the billing codes say DON-SEL. Mara froze. She looked around the parking lot. It was empty, save for a few cars. "You have the receipts?" she whispered. "I have photos." She closed her eyes for a moment. Then she opened them, and the fatigue in her face was replaced by a grim resignation. "Not here," she said. "There is a diner on Route 9 called the Copper Kettle. Meet me there in 20 minutes. If you tell anyone I'm talking to you, I will deny everything." The diner was dimly lit and smelled of bacon grease and old coffee. Mara sat in a booth in the back, stirring a glass of iced tea. I slid into the seat opposite her. "You look like her," Mara said. "You have Elaine's chin, but you have someone else's eyes." "Whose eyes?" I asked. She ignored the question. "You asked about the code. DON-SEL. It stood for Donor Select. So I was a donor baby." I said, "That is it? My father is sterile. They used a donor, and his ego could not handle it?" Mara laughed, a dry, humorless sound, if it were that simple. "Honey, I would not be terrified of talking to you. Standard donor protocol was anonymous. It was clean. But Larkspur in those days, under the old director, we had different tiers of service." "Different tiers?" "For the families in Briar Glen." She said, "The ones with the money, the ones with the names on the library wings. They did not want random donors. They wanted assurance. They wanted pedigree." She leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper. There were files handled outside normal procedure. We called them the blue files. They were not billed through insurance. They were billed directly to private trusts or personal accounts. Cash heavy. No paper trail meant no discovery in a divorce. So my father paid for a specific donor? I asked. Mara looked at me with pity. Or he paid for a specific outcome. I remember your mother. She was sweet, scared. She came in for the treatments alone mostly. But Mr. Hayes, he came in for meetings with the director. Closed-door meetings. And the code? Doncel meant the biological material was prearranged. Mara said, it meant the parents did not pick from a catalog. It meant the donor was already chosen for them. Or by them. By whom? I asked. Mara shook her head. That I do not know. The donor names were never in the billing system, just codes. But I will tell you this, Sarah. When the merger happened, the first thing they did was shred the blue files. If you have receipts, you have the only proof that those transactions ever existed. She stood up, throwing a $5 bill on the table. Be careful, she said. The people who ran Larkspur made a lot of money making sure rich men got the heirs they wanted. They do not like it when the products start asking questions. I drove back to Denise's house, my mind reeling. The product, that is what I was. Not a child, a product. The DNA kit arrived the next day. I performed the swab in the bathroom, staring at my reflection in the mirror. Who was looking back at me? If Martin was not my father, and Elaine had not chosen the donor, then who was I? I mailed the sample and waited. The waiting was a physical ache. It was 4 days of sitting in the hospital room, watching Martin ignore me, watching my mother fade in and out of sleep, watching the silence stretch tight enough to snap. I returned to Philadelphia for 2 days to handle a work crisis, just to feel normal. But I was not normal anymore. I was a ghost in my own life. The email came on a Thursday night at 11:30 p.m. Subject: Your DNA results are ready. I was sitting on my sofa in Philadelphia, a glass of wine untouched on the table. My heart began to hammer against my ribs, a frantic, bird-like rhythm. This was it, the truth. I clicked the link. I entered my password. The screen loaded, a spinning wheel of doom. Then, the dashboard appeared. Paternal lineage. I scanned the list. I looked for the name Hayes. I looked for any connection to the man who had raised me. There was nothing. Biological father. Not Martin Hayes. The words were not written exactly like that. Of course, it was a lack of a match, but the implication was absolute. The man who had sat at the head of the dinner table, who had critiqued my grades and ignored my birthdays, shared 0% of my DNA. I felt a wave of nausea roll over me. I ran to the bathroom and dry-heaved over the toilet. It was not relief. I had thought it would be relief, a vindication. See? You were wrong about me. But it was not. It was a hollowing out. If he wasn't my father, then his cruelty was not a twisted form of parenting. It was the hatred of a stranger. I washed my face with cold water and went back to the computer. I clicked on the DNA Relatives tab. The list populated: second cousins, third cousins, distant matches in Ireland and Germany, and then, at the very top, a match with a red bar next to it indicating high genetic proximity. Predicted relationship, half-sibling. Shared DNA, 26%. Name, private user, location, Briar Glen, Massachusetts. I stared at the screen. A half-sibling. In Briar Glen, Martin Hayes had no other children. I was an only child, which meant this half-sibling was from the donor side. I had a brother or sister living in the same town where I grew up, someone who shared my eyes, my blood, someone whose existence was hidden behind a privacy filter. I grabbed my keys. I drove back to Briar Glen that night, fueled by adrenaline and a terrifying sense of purpose. I arrived at the hospital at 6 in the morning. The nurses were changing shifts. The hallways were quiet. I walked into my mother's room. Martin was there. He had clearly spent the night, sleeping in the recliner. He was awake now, shaving with an electric razor in the small bathroom attached to the suite. The buzz of the razor was an angry insect sound. My mother was awake, propped up on pillows. She looked at me, her eyes widening when she saw my face. I must have looked deranged, sleepless, pale, vibrating with energy. "Sarah?" she whispered. I did not answer her. I walked to the bathroom door and pushed it open. Martin turned, the razor still buzzing in his hand. "What is the meaning of this? You look like a wreck." I held up my phone. The screen was bright in the dim light. I took a DNA test. I said, my voice was steady, deadly calm. Martin turned off the razor. The silence rushed back into the room. He did not look at the phone. He looked at me, his eyes narrowing. "And?" he said. "You are not my father." I said, I expected him to flinch. I expected him to look shocked, or guilty, or even relieved that the secret was out. He did neither. He went perfectly still. He set the razor down on the sink with a deliberate click. He picked up a towel and wiped his face. "Is that supposed to be news?" he asked. The casualness of it took the wind out of me. "You know?" He turned to face me fully. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and disgust. "Of course I know. I have known since the day you were born. Why do you think I have treated you the way I have? Because I am a monster? Or because every time I looked at you, I saw a contract that I regretted signing? You told me I was an affair child," I shouted. The volume of my voice made my mother gasp in the other room. "You told me Mom cheated on you. You let me believe I was the reason your marriage was miserable." "It was a useful narrative," Martin said calmly. "It kept people from asking the wrong questions. It kept your mother in line. And it kept you seeking my approval, which meant you stayed controllable. You lied to me for 33 years. I said, tears finally spilling over. Not sad tears, angry tears. "I protected this family," he snapped, his voice suddenly rising to a roar. He took a step toward me, and for the first time, I saw the panic beneath the polish. "You think this changes anything? You think a piece of paper from a website changes who you are? You are a transaction. Sarah, you are a line item." I held the phone higher. I found a match. I said, "A half-sibling. Here in Briar Glen." Martin's face went white. The blood drained out of it so fast he looked like a corpse. "What did you say?" he whispered. "I have a brother or sister here. A close match." Martin lunged for the phone. It was a clumsy, desperate motion. I stepped back, out of his reach. "Delete it," he hissed. "You have no idea what you are doing. You are playing with fire that will burn this entire town down. Stop it!" The scream came from the bed. We both turned. Elaine had pulled herself up, clutching the rail of the bed. Her face was streaked with tears, her monitor beeping frantically. "Stop it! Martin!" she sobbed. "Leave her alone." I walked over to her. "Mom," I said, "did you know?" She looked at me, and the devastation in her eyes was absolute. She reached out and touched my face. Her hand was trembling. "I tried to keep you safe from this," she whispered. "I tried so hard." "Safe from what?" I asked. "From the truth?" "From them." She said, "From the people who own us." She looked at Martin. "Tell her. Martin, tell her or I will." Martin glared at her. "You will not say a word. You signed the papers." "Elaine, you know the penalty. I do not care about the money anymore," Elaine cried. She turned back to me, gripping my arm with surprising strength. "Sarah, listen to me. That test, that match. You have to be careful. They are not just a donor." "Who?" I demanded. "Who is it?" Elaine opened her mouth to speak, but Martin grabbed my arm and yanked me back. "Get out," he snarled. "Get out before you destroy everything your mother has left." I wrenched my arm free. I looked at Martin, then at my mother. "I am not walking away." I said, "I am going to find them. I am going to find this sibling, and I am going to find out what you sold me for." I turned and walked out of the room. Behind me, I heard the sound of my mother weeping, a high, thin sound that followed me all the way to the elevator. I sat in my car in the parking lot, the engine running. I looked at the profile on the DNA app again. Possible half-sibling, private user Briar Glen. I hit the button that said, Message User. My hands shook as I typed. "Hi. My name is Sarah. I think we are related. I think we share a father. and I think our parents are lying to us." I hit send. The message went into the void. I sat there, watching the sunrise over the hospital roof. Knowing that I had just lit a fuse, I did not know how long the cord was, but I knew that when it reached the end, the explosion would shatter everything. I put the car in drive. I had a town to investigate, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of what Martin Hayes thought. I was terrified of what he was hiding. The silence in the hospital room after Martin slammed the door was heavy, vibrating with the aftershocks of a demolition. My mother, Elaine, looked smaller than I had ever seen her. She was propped against the sterile white pillows, her face a map of exhaustion and terror. The heart monitor beeped a steady, indifferent rhythm, the only thing in the room that wasn't holding its breath. I sat down in the plastic chair next to her bed. I did not take her hand. I felt a strange distance from her, a numbness that had replaced the anger. I was looking at a woman I had known for 33 years, and I was realizing that I did not know her at all. "Tell me," I said. The command was soft, but it had no room for negotiation. Elaine closed her eyes. A tear leaked out and tracked through the powder on her cheek. "We wanted a family," she whispered. That was how it started. It sounds so simple now. We were young. Martin was ambitious. He had this vision of what his life was supposed to look like: the house on the hill, the executive title, the wife, the children. He always said the Hayes name was going to mean something in this town. She took a shaky breath. "We tried for 3 years. Nothing happened. Every month was a failure. Every month, Martin got quieter, colder. He did not look at it as a medical issue. He looked at it as a defect. He refused to get tested at first. He said Hayes' men did not have problems. It had to be me." "And was it?" I asked. "No." She said, "I was fine. When the doctors finally forced him to give a sample, they told him his count was effectively 0. I watched her face. I tried to imagine Martin Hayes, the man who wore arrogance like a suit of armor, being told he was biologically obsolete. It broke him, Elaine said, but not in the way it breaks normal people. He did not get sad. He got angry. He became obsessed with the concept of legacy. He said if he could not make a child, he would curate one. He treated it like an acquisition. Curate, I repeated. The word tasted like metal. He found Larkspur, she said. He knew people on the board. He arranged everything. He controlled every appointment. I was just the vessel. Sarah, I was the incubator for his project. He picked the doctors. He picked the protocol. I leaned forward. And he picked the donor? Elaine flinched. She turned her head to look out the window, where the gray Briar Glen sky was pressing against the glass. He told me it was anonymous. She said, he told me it was a standard bank, but the way he acted, the way the staff treated us, it was not standard. We were ushered in through back doors. We never sat in the waiting room. I pulled up the image of the DNA results on my phone. Though she could not see it, Martin claims I am an affair child. I said, he has punished me for 3 decades for a sin he invented. Why? If he arranged this, if he paid for it, why does he hate me? Because you are the only thing in his life he could not control, she said. And because he changed his mind. Changed his mind? After you were born, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. He looked at you, and he did not see a Hayes. He saw a stranger. He saw proof that he wasn't enough. And then, something happened at the bank. The financial pressure, the stress. He started to panic. He became convinced that if anyone found out he had used a donor, it would look like weakness. In his world, weakness is blood in the water. So he lied. I said, he constructed a narrative that gave him power. She said, if you were an affair child. He was the victim. He was the benevolent husband who forgave his wandering wife. It made him look saintly to the few people he told, and it gave him a weapon to use against me. If I ever tried to leave him, he threatened to drag my name through the mud. He threatened to tell the courts I was an adulteress and take you away. I stared at her. You let me believe I was a mistake. You let me grow up thinking I was garbage because you were afraid of a scandal? I was afraid of losing you, she cried, her voice cracking. You do not know him. Sarah, you do not know what he is capable of when he is cornered. I signed papers. Sarah, I signed things I did not understand. What things? I asked. I do not know. She sobbed. I do not know. I did not get to choose the whole story. The phrase hung in the air. I did not get to choose the whole story. It implied that there were chapters even she had not read. I stood up. The numbness was receding, replaced by a cold, hard determination. I was done with emotions. I was done with tears. I was a logistics coordinator, and I had a discrepancy to resolve. Rest, Mom, I said. I walked out of the hospital room and down to the cafeteria. I found a corner table away from the prying eyes of the medical staff. I opened my laptop and logged back into the DNA platform. The message box was empty. My pulse hammered in my throat. I had sent the message to my half-sibling 4 hours ago. Hi, my name is Sarah. I think we are related. I think we share a father. And I think our parents are lying to us. I refreshed the page. Nothing. I refreshed it again. Then, a notification badge appeared. A red dot. I clicked it. The message was short. It was not a greeting. It was not a question. Stop. They will destroy you. I stared at the screen. The words were terrifying in their simplicity. They, plural, not he, not my father. I began to type a reply. Who are they? Please. I just want to know. But before I could hit send, the screen flickered. The profile picture of the user, which had been a generic geometric pattern, turned into a gray silhouette. The username changed to inactive user, blocked, or deleted. I sat back in the hard plastic chair, my hands trembling. This was not just a family secret. This was an active containment strategy. Someone was watching. Someone was afraid. I needed backup. I drove to Denise's house. My aunt was in her kitchen, aggressively chopping vegetables for a soup no one was going to eat. When I walked in, she dropped the knife. What happened? She asked. You look like you have seen a ghost. I think I've found one, I said. I told her everything. The conversation with Elaine, the message from the half-sibling, the warning. Denise wiped her hands on a dish towel, her face pale. They will destroy you, she repeated. That is melodramatic, even for Briar Glen. Is it? I asked. Martin told me I was playing with fire. He said I would burn the town down. Denise, who owns Larkspur? Who actually owns the clinic? It was bought by Juniper Health a few years ago. She said, no. I said, back then, in the 90s. Who ran it? Denise frowned. It was a private practice, but it was connected to the network here. The funding came from private equity. I think we need to look at public records. I said, we need to see if there were lawsuits, if Mara Dorsey is right. And there were blue files handled off the books. There has to be a trace. Even the best cover-ups leave paper cuts. We spent the next 6 hours in Denise's study. We bypassed the standard Google searches and went into the county clerk's archives and the state court records database. I paid $50 for a 24-hour access pass. I searched Larkspur Women's Clinic. Hundreds of hits. Most were mundane: zoning permits, waste disposal contracts, employment disputes. Then I searched Larkspur and fraud. Nothing. I searched Larkspur and breach of contract. A dozen hits. Most were dismissed. Then I tried a different angle. I searched for sealed cases. You cannot see the contents of a sealed case, but you can sometimes see the docket entry if the clerical work was sloppy. I found one. Case number CV940021. Jane Doe versus Larkspur Women's Clinic. Filed June 1994. Status settled/sealed. Judge Honorable Arthur P. Vance. I looked at the list of attached parties. The plaintiff was anonymous. The defendant was the clinic. But listed under interested parties/interveners was an entity I recognized, the Briar Glen Community Trust. I pointed at the screen. Denise, look at this. Why would a community charity trust be an interested party in a medical malpractice or breach of contract suit against a fertility clinic? Denise squinted at the screen. The community trust? They fund the library, they pay for the fireworks on the 4th of July, and they fund the cardiac wing where my mother is currently lying. I said, I saw the plaque on the wall yesterday, generously supported by the Briar Glen Community Trust. I opened a new tab and searched for the Trust's board of directors. The current list was a who's who of local power, but I needed the list from the 90s. I found a digitized PDF of an old annual report from 1995. Board of Directors, Grant Alden. Chairman, Thomas W. Pike. Treasurer, Martin Hayes. Secretary. I froze. Martin? I whispered. He is on the board, Denise said, reading over my shoulder. He has been on the board for 30 years. I said, Denise, Martin always told me he hated charity. He called it writing checks to assuage guilt. But he has been secretary of the biggest charitable trust in the county since I was in diapers. And the trust intervened in a lawsuit against the clinic where you were conceived. Denise said slowly. The pieces were clicking together like the tumblers of a safe. Martin wasn't just a client of the clinic. He was part of the machinery that protected it. I need to talk to Mara again. I said, I did not go to the clinic this time. I found Mara's home address in the phone book. A small ranch house on the outskirts of town, where the lawns were smaller and the fences were chain link instead of wrought iron. I knocked on her door at 7 p.m. The porch light flickered. Mara opened the door a crack, the chain still on. When she saw me, she sighed. I told you. She said, off the record. I know. I said, but I found the community trust. I found the lawsuit from 94. Martin Hayes is on the board. Mara closed her eyes. For a moment, I thought she was going to slam the door. Instead, she undid the chain and opened it. Come in, she said. But leave your phone in the car. I sat on her floral sofa while she paced the small living room. She lit a cigarette, her hands shaking. You are digging in a graveyard. Sarah, she said, tell me about the trust. I said, the trust is the bank account for the town's reputation. Mara said, exhaling a plume of smoke. You think it is for libraries and parks? That is the front. The trust exists to clean up messes. What kind of messes? The kind that happen when powerful men think they are gods. She said. She sat down opposite me. You asked about the donor select program. You asked who the donors were. Yes, they weren't medical students looking for beer money. Mara said, that is the standard pool. Larkspur offered something else. They called it the legacy tier. Legacy tier, I repeated. Couples like your parents wanted guarantees. They wanted intelligence, athleticism, specific physical traits, but more than that, they wanted social proof. They wanted genes that came from approved circles. Approved circles? Men they knew. Mara said, men they respected. Men who were winners. My stomach turned. You are saying they used sperm from their friends? I am saying there was a pool of donors who were recruited from the country club set. Mara said, highly confidential, the men were paid. Or compensated in other ways. Business deals, zoning approvals, favorable loan rates. And the wives? I asked. Did the wives know? Some did. Mara said, most didn't. Most were told it was an anonymous genius from Harvard Medical School. They didn't know the biological father was the man shaking their husband's hand at the Christmas party. I felt sick. It was incestuous. Not biologically, perhaps, but socially. It was a closed loop of power. And Martin? I asked. Martin was involved. She said, I do not know if he was a donor. But he was definitely a facilitator. He handled the money. When things went wrong, when a child was born with a defect, or a mother started asking questions, the trust stepped in. They settled the lawsuits. They paid for the silence. And the affair story? I asked. The lie about me? Mara looked at me with sad eyes. Think about it. If you ever started asking who your father was, and Martin admitted he used a clinic, you might find the receipts. You might find the blue files. You might trace it back to the trust. But if he screams, "She is a bastard child of an affair," then nobody looks at the clinic. Nobody looks at the trust. They just look at your mother and call her a whore. It was a preemptive strike. He had branded me to protect the conspiracy. I left Mara's house feeling dirty. The air outside was cold, but I felt like I needed a shower to scrub the knowledge off my skin. I needed someone who understood how this town worked from the outside. I needed a journalist. I found Calvin Reese's byline on a series of articles about local corruption from 10 years ago. He had written for the Briar Glen Gazette before moving to an independent blog. I tracked him down at a dive bar called the Rusty Anchor near the old textile mills. He was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with a face that looked like it had been crumpled up and smoothed out too many times. He was nursing a beer and reading a book on the end of the bar. "Calvin Reese?" I asked. He looked up. "Who is asking?" "Sarah Hayes." He put his beer down. "Hayes? As in Martin Hayes?" "Yes." He laughed. A sharp, barking sound. "I do not talk to Hayeses. You people are the reason I drink. I am not one of them." I said, "I am the one Martin Hayes has spent 30 years trying to erase." That got his attention. He gestured to the stool next to him. "Sit. You have 5 minutes." I gave him the condensed version, the DNA test, the receipts, the trust, the lawsuit. When I finished, Calvin was not laughing. He was staring at me with a look of intense calculation. "You found the '94 lawsuit," he said. "Doe versus Larkspur. I tried to unseal that 5 years ago. The judge threatened to hold me in contempt if I even breathed on the file." "Why?" I asked. "Because that judge plays golf with Grant Alden." Calvin said, "Listen to me. Sarah, you are walking into a meat grinder. These people, the Aldens, the Hayeses, the Pikes, they do not operate by normal rules. They do not need to win in court." "What do you mean?" "I mean they have infinite resources, and you have a salary from a logistics firm." Calvin said, "They will not just sue you, they will exhaust you. They will file motions until you are bankrupt. They will have private investigators dig through your trash. They will call your employer. They will make your life so small and so miserable that you will sign anything just to make it stop. I am not afraid of them." I said, "You should be." He said, "They own the game board. You are just a pawn who thinks she is a queen because she found a receipt." He took a sip of his beer. "But if you are serious, if you are actually willing to burn it down, you need paper, real paper, not memories, not off-the-record chats with billing clerks. You need the medical records officially released." "How do I get them?" "You file a formal HIPAA request," he said. "Certified mail. Copy the state medical board. Make it official. Force them to deny you on the record. Once they deny you, you have a cause of action." I did it the next morning. I drafted a formal request for my mother's complete medical file from the dates of 1992 to 1994, specifically requesting all fertility treatment records, billing ledgers, and consent forms from the entity formerly known as Larkspur Women's Clinic. I attached a power of attorney form that Denise had convinced Elaine to sign in a moment of lucidity. I mailed it certified. Return receipt requested. Then I went to the hospital to say goodbye to my mother. I had to go back to Philadelphia for a few days to pack a bag for a longer stay. I was not giving up, but I needed supplies. Elaine was sitting up in bed, looking frail. I filed the request. "Mom," I said. Her face crumpled. "Sarah, please, just stop. You do not know what you are doing. I know exactly what I'm doing." I said, "I am finding out who I am." "You are going to get hurt," she whispered. "Martin was on the phone all night. He knows you are up to something. Let him know." I said, "I am tired of being small. Mom, I am tired of hiding in the corner of the family photo." I drove back to Philadelphia. The drive was a blur of adrenaline and anxiety. I felt like I was being watched. Every black SUV in my rearview mirror looked suspicious. 2 days later, I was in my apartment when the courier arrived. He handed me a thick envelope. It was not from the clinic. It was from a law firm, Wexler Crown, LLP. I tore it open. Dear Ms. Hayes, we represent Juniper Reproductive Health and the Briar Glen Community Trust. We are in receipt of your request for records dated October 24th, 1993. Please be advised that the records you seek are subject to strict confidentiality agreements signed by your mother, Elaine Hayes, and are further protected by a seal order issued by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Furthermore, your inquiries regarding the private medical history of third parties constitute a potential violation of privacy laws. We have been instructed to inform you that any further attempts to access these sealed files, or any public dissemination of privileged information regarding the trust or its beneficiaries, will be met with immediate legal action, including but not limited to a restraining order and a suit for defamation. We strongly advise you to direct all future communications to the undersigned. Sincerely, Preston Crown, Esquire. I held the letter in my hand. My fingers were trembling, but not from fear, from rage. They had responded in 48 hours. They had connected the clinic to the trust explicitly in the letter. They had threatened me. Calvin was right. They were trying to exhaust me, but they had made a mistake. By sending this letter, they had confirmed that there was something to hide. They had confirmed that the trust was involved in my conception. I picked up my phone and dialed Calvin Reese. I got a letter. I said when he answered, "From who?" "Wexler and Crown." Calvin let out a low whistle. "The heavy hitters. What did they say?" "They told me to shut up." I said, And I think I need to schedule a meeting." I said, "But not with the lawyer. I need to meet the people they are protecting." "You are crazy." Calvin said, "Maybe." I said, "But they just handed me the first piece of undeniable proof. They are scared." Calvin, "And I'm just getting started." The law offices of Wexler and Crown were located in the tallest building in downtown Boston, a glass needle that pierced the gray October sky. The waiting room was an exercise in intimidation. The furniture was low and modern, the kind that forced you to sit at an awkward angle while the receptionist sat high above you behind a marble fortress. I was not alone. Denise sat to my left, wearing her best Sunday suit, clutching her purse like a shield. Calvin Reese was not allowed in the meeting, but he was sitting in the lobby of the building, a sentinel with a notepad. "Mr. Crown will see you now," the receptionist said. She did not look up from her screen. We were ushered into a conference room that smelled of leather and old money. The view of the harbor was spectacular, designed to remind everyone who sat on the other side of the table just how small they were. Preston Crown was a man who looked like he had been manufactured rather than born. His suit was midnight blue, his hair was silver and immobile, and his smile did not reach his eyes. He did not stand up when we entered. "Miss Hayes," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite him, "and Mrs. Torrance, thank you for coming." I sat down. I kept my back straight. I had spent the drive over rehearsing my anger, but now that I was here, I felt a cold, clinical detachment. "You sent me a cease and desist letter." I said, "I sent you a reminder of your legal obligations." Crown corrected smoothly. He slid a folder across the polished wood. "But we are not here to threaten you. Sarah. May I call you Sarah? We are here to help you navigate a difficult family situation." He opened the folder. Inside was a single document, stapled once in the corner. "My client, the Briar Glen Community Trust, understands that you have been under a great deal of stress," Crown said. "Your mother's illness, the confusion over your parentage. It is understandable that you are lashing out." "I am not lashing out," I said. "I am asking for my medical history." Crown sighed, a sound of paternal disappointment. "You are looking for a story that does not exist. However, the trust values privacy above all else. The families involved in the early years of the clinic were prominent citizens. They have a right to their anonymity. To avoid the ugliness of a protracted legal battle, which, I assure you, you would lose, the trust is prepared to offer you a settlement." He slid a check across the table. It was face down. I turned it over. $300,000. It was more money than I made in 4 years. It was life-changing money. It was silence money. "This is for my emotional distress?" I asked. "It is a nuisance fee," Crown said, his voice hardening slightly. "But it comes with conditions. I looked at the document. It was a standard non-disclosure agreement, dense with legalese, but on the second page, there was a clause that made my blood run cold. The undersigned affirms that to the best of her knowledge, she is the biological offspring of Elaine Hayes and an unknown third party, conceived via extramarital relations, and agrees to maintain this narrative in all public and private statements to preserve the reputational integrity of the Hayes family. I read it twice. You want me to lie? I said. I looked up at him. You are paying me to say my mother is a cheater. We are paying you to maintain the status quo. Crown said, that is the story your father has told for 30 years. That is the story the town knows. Changing it now serves no one. It only embarrasses your mother. It is not true, I said. Truth is a flexible concept in civil litigation, Crown said. He leaned forward, clasping his manicured hands. Listen to me. Sarah, if you pursue this, if you try to expose the clinic, you will be dragging your mother's name through the mud. You will be known as the woman who sued a charity. You will be unheardable. You will be a pariah. Or you can take this check, go back to Philadelphia, and live a very comfortable life. I looked at the check, then I looked at the clause. They were not protecting Martin from the shame of being sterile. They were protecting the clinic. If I admitted I was an affair baby, the clinic was irrelevant. If I was a clinic baby, the books had to open. The lie was the product. The lie was the firewall. I stood up. No, I said. Crown didn't blink. He didn't look angry. He looked bored. I would reconsider. He said, the offer expires when you walk out that door. And I must warn you, Sarah, the world is a difficult place when you have powerful enemies. I left the check on the table. Come on. Denise, we walked out. My legs were shaking, but my head was clear. Calvin met us in the lobby. Well, he asked. They offered me $300,000 to say my mom had an affair. I said. Calvin let out a low whistle. That means you are worth at least $3 million to them. They are terrified. But the terror went both ways. The retaliation began exactly 24 hours later. I was sitting in the hospital cafeteria, trying to catch up on emails, when my phone rang. It was my boss, Gregory, from the logistics firm in Philadelphia. Sarah, Gregory said. His voice was tight, lacking its usual warmth. I need to ask you some questions about your expense reports from the last quarter. I frowned. What about them? I have not traveled since July. We received an anonymous tip this morning via the ethics hotline, Gregory said, alleging that you have been using the corporate card for personal fuel and meals. We are opening a formal audit. I have to suspend your access to the company servers until it is resolved. Gregory, that is insane, I said, panic rising in my chest. You know me. I have never expensed a cup of coffee I didn't drink with a client. It is protocol. Sarah, I am sorry. We have to investigate. He hung up. 5 minutes later, my personal email pinged. It was a notification from my landlord in Philadelphia. Notice of lease violation. Complaint. Multiple noise disturbances and unauthorized subletting. I was 300 miles away. My apartment was empty. Then, a notification from my credit monitoring app. New inquiry. High-risk loan application. Someone was applying for loans in my name. I sat there, the phone burning in my hand. It was a coordinated strike. They were not just threatening me. They were dismantling the infrastructure of my life. They were showing me that I existed only because they allowed it. I went up to my mother's room. She was awake, sitting in the chair by the window. She looked better physically, but her eyes were haunted. Mom, I said, I need you to tell me about the signing. What signing? She asked, her voice trembling. You said you signed papers you didn't understand. When? Elaine looked at her hands. It was right after the procedure. The implantation. I was groggy. They had given me Valium. Martin was there, and a man in a suit. A lawyer? I think so. They put a clipboard in my lap. Martin held my hand, not affectionately, but to keep it steady. He said, Sign this. Elaine, it is just the standard consent for the hospital. And you signed it? I trusted him, she whispered. Back then, I still trusted him. He said it was for insurance, but later, years later, when I threatened to leave him, he pulled a copy out of his safe. It wasn't insurance. Sarah. It was a non-disclosure agreement regarding the proprietary genetic assets of Larkspur Clinic. Proprietary genetic assets, I repeated. That was me. I was the asset. He told me if I ever spoke about the donor arrangement, I would be in breach of contract. She said, he said they could take the house. They could take my pension. They could take you. She started to cry. I was so scared. Sarah. I thought if I just kept my mouth shut, we could be a family. But he never forgave me for knowing. I walked over and hugged her. It was the first time I had hugged her in years. She felt frail, like a bird made of hollow bones. It is not your fault. Mom, I said into her hair. He tricked you. That is coercion. That contract is garbage. But they have the money. She sobbed. They have all the money. I left the hospital and drove to my childhood home. I needed to find the safe. But as I walked into my old bedroom, I remembered something. My mother didn't use the safe. The safe was Martin's domain. Elaine hid things in the mundane spaces of the house, under mattresses, inside winter boots, behind books. I went to her closet. It smelled of lavender sachets and silence. I started searching. I checked the pockets of her coats. I checked the shoeboxes. Finally, on the top shelf, behind a stack of old hat boxes, I found a wooden chest. It was simple, unvarnished pine. I opened it. It was full of envelopes, dozens of them, all addressed to Sarah. None of them had stamps. I sat on the floor and opened the first one. The date was January 19th, 1999, my 5th birthday, my darling Sarah. Today you turned 5. You wore the blue dress I bought you. Even though Martin said it was too frilly, you look like a princess. I wanted to tell you how much I love you, but the words get stuck in my throat when he is in the room. He looks at you so coldly. I see you shrinking away from him, and it breaks my heart. I am writing this so that one day you will know. You were wanted. You were so wanted. By me. I opened another. June 2008. Martin was screaming again tonight. He called you stupid because you got a B in math. You aren't stupid. You're brilliant. But he needs you to be small so he can feel big. I almost fought back today. I almost told him to get out. But then I remembered the papers. I remembered that he could take you away. I am a coward. Sarah, please forgive me for being a coward. I read for an hour. The room grew dark around me. These were not the writings of a distant, cold mother. They were the confessions of a hostage. She had loved me fiercely, secretly, from the margins of her own life. I wiped my eyes. The anger I had felt toward her evaporated, replaced by a cold, diamond-hard fury directed at one man. I heard a car in the driveway. I packed the letters back into the box and shoved it into my duffel bag. I went downstairs. Denise was in the kitchen, making tea. She looked up as I entered. You found them, she said, eyeing the bag. You knew? I knew she wrote them, Denise said. I didn't know if she kept them. Denise, I said, sitting down at the table, why did Martin change? You said he was different before the incident at Harrow and Pike. What happened? Denise poured 2 cups of tea. It was 1992, she said. Martin was a rising star. Harrow and Pike was the biggest investment firm in the county. They handled the endowments for the university, the hospital, and the trust. And then the SEC started looking into them. She said, there were rumors of embezzlement, laundering money for offshore accounts. Martin was the compliance officer. He was the guy supposed to catch it. So he quit? He resigned abruptly. The investigation vanished 2 weeks later. No charges filed. The firm restructured, and Martin came back 6 months later as a consultant, making triple his old salary, and suddenly he had the cash to buy this house and pay for elite fertility treatments. I stared at her. It was blackmail, or a payoff. Denise said, he took the fall, or he buried the evidence. Either way, he sold his soul in 92. By the time he started the fertility process with Elaine, he was already owned. The The trust isn't just a charity, Sarah. It is the reward system for the people who keep Briar Glen's secrets. That is why he is so obsessed with legacy. I realized, because he knows his fortune is built on sand. He knows he is a fraud. I met Calvin at the Rusty Anchor that night. He was drinking coffee this time. He had a folder thick with papers. "You were right about the pattern," he said, sliding the folder to me. I opened it. It was a spreadsheet. I cross-referenced the blue file families, the ones Mara hinted at, with real estate records and school enrollment. Calvin said, "Look at this." He pointed to a cluster of names, 5 families, all prominent, the Aldens, the Pikes, the Bradleys, the Wilsons, and the Hayeses. All of them had children born between 93 and 95. Calvin said, "And look at the mothers. Mrs. Bradley moved to France in 98, divorced. Mrs. Wilson committed suicide in 2001. Mrs. Pike moved to Arizona in 99. The women disappear." Calvin said, "The men stay. The children stay. They are breeding heirs," I whispered. "It is a eugenics program for the country club, and I got this from Mara." Calvin said, he pulled a photocopy of an old ledger page out of his jacket. "She risked her pension to get this for you. She went into the basement of her own house. She kept a backup of the billing codes from 93. I looked at the grainy copy. It was a list of donor codes. Client, Hayes. Code, DON-SEL-88. Client, Bradley. Code, DON-SEL-88. Client, Wilson. Code, DON-SEL-88. They all used the same donor. I said, "Look at the donor key," Calvin said, pointing to the bottom of the page. Source 88, G-A-G-A. I said, "Grant Alden." Calvin said, "The chairman of the trust, the man who runs this town." My mouth went dry. "Grant Alden is my father, and probably the father of half the debutante ball," Calvin said grimly. He was spreading his seed like he was stocking a pond. I thought of the DNA match, the half-sibling in Briar Glen. "I need to see him," I said. "You cannot just walk up to Grant Alden," Calvin said. "He lives in a fortress. I do not need to go to his house." I said, "I saw the invitation on Martin's desk. The trust gala is tonight, at the country club." "Sarah." "No," Calvin said. "That is a lion's den. I am not going as a guest." I said, "I am going as evidence." I borrowed a dress from Denise. It was black, elegant, and severe. I pulled my hair back. I put on red lipstick. I looked like a haze. I drove to the Briar Glen Country Club. The valet parking was full of Bentleys and Mercedes. I parked my rental car down the road and walked up the long driveway. I did not have a ticket, but I knew the catering staff entrance. I had worked a summer catering job here when I was 16, one of the few things Martin had allowed, claiming it would teach me the value of $1. I slipped in through the kitchen. The chaos of the dinner service covered me. I walked through the swinging doors and into the ballroom. It was a sea of tuxedos and diamonds. A jazz band was playing. The air smelled of expensive perfume and roasted duck. I scanned the room. I saw Martin near the bar, holding a scotch, looking miserable. I saw Preston Crown, the lawyer, laughing with a group of men, and then I saw him, Grant Alden. He was standing near the stage. He was taller than Martin, with a full head of silver hair and a face that looked like it belonged on a coin. He was handsome in an imperial way. Standing next to him was his wife, a woman who looked made of porcelain, and next to her were 2 young adults, a boy and a girl. I focused on the girl. She was wearing a green dress. She was laughing at something Grant said. She turned her head, and the profile was undeniable. She had my nose. She had my jawline. She had the same way of tilting her head when she listened. It was like looking in a mirror that had been polished with money. I stood there, frozen. That was my sister, my half-sister. The DNA match. I took a step forward. Suddenly, a hand clamped onto my upper arm. It was painful. I turned. Martin was there. His face was a mask of fury, his eyes bulging. "What the hell do you think you are doing?" he hissed. I wrenched my arm away. "I am looking at my family. Martin. My real family." He stepped in front of me, blocking my view of the Aldens. "You are drunk," he said, though I hadn't touched a drop. "You are making a scene. I haven't said a word." I said, "But I know. Martin, I know about Grant. I know about the code. I know you bought me from him because you couldn't do the job yourself." Martin's face went from red to a terrifyingly pale gray. "Keep your voice down," he snarled. "Why? Are you afraid your friends will find out you are a cuckold?" I asked. "Or are you afraid Grant will find out you lost control of his product?" Martin grabbed my arm again, dragging me toward the terrace doors. We spilled out into the cool night air. The music was muffled behind the glass. "You ungrateful little wretch." Martin spat. He was shaking. "I gave you a name. I gave you a home. I fed you and clothed you for 30 years. You gave me a prison," I shouted. "You made me hate myself to protect your ego. I protected you," he screamed. "You think Grant Alden wants you? You think he wants a bastard daughter showing up and ruining his perfect tableau? He will crush you. Sarah, he will not embrace you. He will bury you. I don't care." I said, "You should care about your mother." Martin said. His voice dropped. "Becoming deadly. If you go back in there, if you say one word to Grant or his daughter, I will ruin Elaine. I will release the medical records myself. I will paint her as a mentally unstable drug addict who slept with half the town. I will make sure she dies alone and ashamed in that hospital bed." I stared at him. He meant it. He would sacrifice his wife to save his standing. "You are a monster," I whispered. "I am a pragmatist," Martin said, straightening his tie. "Now, you are going to get in your car, and you are going to drive away, and you are going to sign that settlement, because if you don't, you won't just lose. You will be the reason your mother has nothing left." He turned and walked back into the party. I stood on the terrace, shivering. I looked through the glass. I saw Grant Alden toast the room. I saw the girl in the green dress smile. Martin was right about one thing. Grant didn't want me. But Martin was wrong about the weapon. He thought social ruin was the ultimate threat. He thought shame was the fence that would keep me out. But I had lived in shame my whole life. I was immune to it. I took my phone out. I took a picture of Grant Alden standing with his daughter. Then I walked to my car. I wasn't going to sign the settlement. I was going to find the girl in the green dress. And I was going to blow the doors off the Briar Glen Community Trust. I did not sleep after the gala. I sat in my rental car outside the wrought iron gates of the Alden estate, watching the lights in the mansion flick off one by one. I was not stalking them. I was waiting for the courage to make the call. I knew who she was now. Claire Alden, 29 years old, director of a boutique art gallery in downtown Briar Glen. I had found her biography on the gallery website in 10 seconds of searching. Her face on the screen was a softer, wealthier version of my own. At 9 in the morning, I walked into the gallery. It was a stark, white space filled with abstract paintings that cost more than my car. There were no other customers. Claire was sitting at a glass desk in the back. When the door chimed, she looked up with a professional smile. "Good morning," she said. Then she saw me. The smile vanished. She stood up slowly, her hand going to her throat. She was wearing a silk blouse the color of cream. I was wearing my jeans and a blazer, the uniform of a woman who had come to work. "You are the one from the gala," she said. Her voice was shaking. "My name is Sarah Hayes," I said. Claire let out a breath that sounded like a sob. She walked around the desk and locked the front door of the gallery. She flipped the sign to closed. "I knew you would come eventually," she said. She did not look at me with hatred. She looked at me with a terrified recognition. "You are the private match," I said. "On the DNA app, you are the one who told me to stop." Claire nodded. She gestured to a velvet bench in the center of the room. We sat down, leaving 2 feet of space between us. It felt like a magnetic field, charged and humming. I took the test 3 years ago. Claire said, "Just for fun. My friends and I were doing it to see our heritage percentages. I thought I would see British, French, maybe some Scandinavian. And instead, I saw 5 half-siblings. She said. I froze. 5? 5, she repeated, all listed as close family, all anonymous, and all with genetic markers that linked back to one parent. Grant, I said. She flinched at the name. My father. She looked at her hands. They were manicured. Perfect. I confronted him. Sarah. 3 years ago. I printed out the results and I put them on his desk. I do not know what I thought. I thought maybe he had donated to a bank when he was in college. I thought it was a youthful indiscretion. What did he say? He laughed. She said, it was the coldest sound I have ever heard. He told me that I was being dramatic. He said that great men have an obligation to spread their gifts. He called it genetic philanthropy. I felt the bile rise in my throat. Philanthropy. He told me that if I ever spoke about it, he would cut me off. Claire said, he said the family trust has clauses about conduct unbecoming. He made it very clear that my lifestyle, my gallery, my apartment, it all depends on my silence. So I deleted the app, I blocked the matches, I tried to forget. But you warned me. I said, because you are the first one who looked like you were fighting back. She said, and because you are a Hayes, what does that mean? Claire looked at me, her eyes wide. You do not know? The Hayes family isn't just a recipient. Sarah, your father, Martin, he was the architect. I leaned back, the room spinning slightly. Tell me, my father is a narcissist. Claire said, he believes he is a king, but back in 1992, he was a king who was about to be beheaded. There was an investigation into the Alden accounts, insider trading, embezzlement. He was going to prison. The timeline Denise had mentioned, the incident at Harrow and Pike. Martin Hayes was the compliance officer. Claire continued, he found the evidence. He could have buried my father. Instead, they made a deal. The trust. I said, the trust was the vehicle. Claire said, they restructured the debt. They moved the money around so it looked like charity losses instead of theft. Martin fixed the books. He saved my father's life. And in return, my father gave Martin access to the one thing Martin could not buy. Claire said, a legacy. Martin was sterile. He was desperate. So my father offered him a donation. I stared at her. You are saying Martin Hayes agreed to raise Grant Alden's child as payment for covering up a crime? It was the ultimate bond. Claire said, mutually assured destruction. If Martin ever talked about the fraud, Grant would reveal that Martin's heir was a bastard. If Grant ever talked about the paternity, Martin would go to the SEC. They locked each other in a cage and threw away the key, and you are the lock. I stood up and walked to one of the paintings. It was a chaotic swirl of red and black. It looked like how my brain felt. It wasn't just me. I said, you said there were 5 matches. The legacy tier, Claire said bitterly. That is what they called it. Once they realized the system worked, that the clinic could hide the truth and the trust could hide the money, they expanded it. My father's ego knows no bounds. He started offering his material to other friends in their circle who were having trouble conceiving. He thought he was improving the town. He thought he was breeding a better class of people. And the wives? I asked. Did they know? My mother knows. Claire said, she drinks a bottle of wine a night to forget it. I think your mother knew she was getting a donor, but I doubt she knew it was Grant. That was part of the game for them. The secret joke. I looked at my sister, my half-sister. She was trapped in a golden cage, silenced by money and fear. I am going to burn it down. Claire, I said. Claire looked at me. Her expression was fearful, but there was a spark of something else. Hope. They will come for you, she said. Let them come, I said. I have nothing to lose. You have a gallery and a trust fund. I have a rental car and a lot of anger. I left the gallery and drove straight to the hospital. The pieces of the puzzle were no longer scattered. They formed a picture of grotesque entitlement. Elaine was eating lunch, picking at a tray of gray turkey and mashed potatoes. She looked up when I entered. Mom, I said, I need you to focus. She put down her fork. Sarah, you look intense. I met Claire Alden. I said, Grant Alden's daughter. Elaine went still. Her hand fluttered to her chest. She told me about the deal. Mom, I said, she told me that Martin saved Grant from prison in '92, and in exchange, Grant gave Martin a child. Elaine's eyes filled with tears. She looked away, staring at the heart monitor. I did not know about the prison. She whispered, I did not know about the fraud. Martin never told me business. But you knew about Grant. I said, No, she cried. She looked at me, desperate to be believed. I swear to you. Sarah, I did not know it was Grant. Not at first. Martin just said he had found a donor from a superior background. He made it sound like a Nobel Prize winner. But you suspected. I pressed. Later, she admitted. Her voice was a ghost. It was the laugh. The laugh? We were at the clinic, she said. For the transfer. I was in the gown, waiting on the table. The door was cracked open. I heard Martin in the hallway. He was talking to someone, and then I heard that laugh. Grant Alden has a very specific laugh. It is loud, booming, like he owns the air around him. She shuddered. I heard Grant say, Make sure it is a good one, Martin. I only make winners. And then they both laughed, like they were closing a deal on a golf course. I felt sick. I wanted to run, but I was already prepped. And Martin, he came in smiling. He never smiled. He looked so triumphant. She reached out and grabbed my hand. Her grip was weak, but frantic. I looked at you when you were born, she said, and I looked for Grant. I was so terrified you would look like him. When Martin started hating you, part of me was relieved, because if he hated you, it meant he was keeping the distance. If he had loved you, if he had paraded you around, it would have been unbearable. He hated me because I was the receipt for his crime. I said, I stayed at the hospital for another hour, recording everything Elaine said on my phone. She was ready to talk now. The fear of Martin was still there, but the guilt of 30 years was stronger. That afternoon, I met Calvin and Denise at Denise's house. We turned the dining room into a war room. We have the motive, Calvin said. Pacing the room, financial cover-up for genetic legacy, quid pro quo. We have the mechanism, Denise added. The trust in the clinic. We need the proof. I said, I have Elaine's testimony. I have Claire's verbal confirmation, though she won't go on record yet. I have the billing codes. It is circumstantial, Calvin warned. Strong, but circumstantial. If we go to the press, Wexler and Crown will sue for libel. They will say the billing codes are for something else. They will say Elaine is hallucinating from medication. I pulled out the envelope I had received from the law firm. They threatened me. I said, they acknowledged the connection between the trust and the clinic in writing. That helps, Calvin said. But we need a smoking gun. We have Mara. I said, I called Mara Dorsey. She answered on the first ring. I am ready, she said. She met us at the house an hour later. She brought a notarized affidavit. She had written it out by hand. It detailed the specific instructions she had received from Martin Hayes in 1993 regarding the special handling of the Alden donor accounts. It detailed the shredding parties in 2005. It detailed the cash payments from the trust to the clinic directors. This is it, Calvin said. Reading the document, this connects the money to the biology. I looked at the stack of evidence. It was a pile of paper that dismantled the lives of the 5 most powerful families in Briar Glen. I am going to call a meeting. I said, with who? Denise asked. With the board of the trust. I said, I drafted the email carefully. I addressed it to Preston Crown, with copies to Grant Alden and Martin Hayes. Subject: Notice of intent to disclose evidence of fraud and medical malpractice. Dear Mr. Crown, I am in possession of sworn testimony, internal billing ledgers, and genetic evidence linking the Briar Glen Community Trust to a pattern of coercion, fraud, and illegal medical practices at the former Larkspur Women's Clinic. This evidence implicates the current board chairman and secretary in a decades-long scheme involving financial misappropriation and undisclosed biological experimentation on non-consenting patients. I am prepared to release this file to the Boston Globe, the State Attorney General, and the Securities and Exchange Commission in 48 hours. I am willing to meet for a mediation session prior to release. Wednesday, 10 a.m., Briar Glen Civic Center, Room B. The only attendees will be the board and their counsel. If you fail to appear, the story runs, sincerely, Sarah Hayes. I hit send. The response was silence. For 6 hours. Nothing happened. The sun went down. Denise made dinner. Calvin sat on the porch, smoking. Then, at 9 p.m., there was a knock on the door. It wasn't a lawyer. It wasn't the police. It was Martin. I opened the door. He stood on the porch, looking older than I had ever seen him. His shoulders were slumped. The arrogance that usually held him upright was gone, replaced by a weary desperation. "May I come in?" he asked. I stepped back. He walked into the hallway. He did not look at Denise. He looked only at me. "You sent the email," he said. "I did." "You are going to destroy us." "Sarah, I am going to tell the truth." "Martin, there is a difference." He let out a long sigh and walked into the living room. He sat down heavily on the sofa. He looked at his hands. "I have a proposition," he said. "I am not signing your settlement." I said, "It is not about money," he said. He looked up at me. His eyes were wet. "I will acknowledge you," he said. I stared at him. "What?" "I will release a statement," he said. "I will say that the affair story was a misunderstanding. I will say that we used a donor, and that I am proud to be your father. I will claim you. I will put you in the will. I will give you the Hayes name, fully and legally. You will be my daughter." I watched him. For 33 years, I had starved for this. I had spent my childhood trying to be perfect, trying to be quiet, trying to be smart enough and good enough to make him look at me with something other than disgust. I had wanted him to claim me more than I had wanted air. And now, here it was, placed on the table like a bargaining chip. "And you know what?" he continued, his voice softening. "We can be a family. Elaine wants it. I am tired. Sarah, I am tired of the fighting. I am an old man. Let me make it right. Just drop the investigation. Let the past stay in the past. Be my daughter." The room was silent. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. I looked at this man. I looked at the way he sat, the way he adjusted his cufflinks even now. He wasn't offering me love. He was offering me a transaction. He was trying to buy my silence with the one currency he thought I couldn't resist. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It was the feeling of a heavy weight finally dropping away. "I do not want it," I said. Martin blinked. "What?" "I do not want to be your daughter." I said, "I spent my whole life begging for a seat at your table. I thought there was something wrong with me because you wouldn't let me sit down. But now I see the table, Martin, and it is covered in rot. Sarah, please." "No," I said, my voice rising. "You do not get to use love as a bribe. You do not get to treat me like garbage for 3 decades and then offer me scraps to save your own skin. You are not my father. You are just a man who bought a lie and got mad when it grew up and learned to speak." Martin's face hardened. The sadness vanished, replaced by the cold, reptilian stare I knew so well. But behind the anger, I saw it. Fear. He was terrified of me. "Fine," he spat, standing up. "You want war? You will get war. You have no idea what Grant Alden is capable of. I know exactly what he is capable of." I said, "He is capable of selling his own children, and you are capable of buying them." "Get out of my house!" Martin stormed out. The door slammed behind him. Shaking the frame, I turned to Denise and Calvin. "They are coming to the meeting." I said, "How do you know?" Denise asked. "Because he just tried to surrender." I said, "And I didn't accept." Now they have no choice. The meeting was set for the next morning. I spent the night preparing the files. I made copies of everything. I sent a digital backup to a secure cloud server and gave the password to Calvin. At midnight, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Hello? Sarah?" The voice was a whisper. It was Claire. Claire, are you okay? I am locked in my bedroom, she said. I heard my father on the phone. He was talking to Wexler. They are planning something for tomorrow. What kind of something? I do not know, she said. But Sarah, they got to my brother. Your brother? Thomas, she said. He lives in New York. He has been asking questions about the trust fund lately. He was going to come home for Thanksgiving. Dad just called him. He offered him a job in London. $300,000 a year. Starting immediately. The same amount they offered me. I noted, the price of a child. Thomas took it. Claire said, her voice breaking. He is flying out tomorrow. They are clearing the board. Sarah, they are moving the pieces so there is no one left to back you up. They still have to face me. I said, please be careful. Claire whispered. My father sounded different tonight. He sounded like he did when he was hunting. I hung up. I looked at the file on the table. The Hayes/Alden dossier. I wasn't hunting. I was the trap. And tomorrow morning, I was going to see if the wolf would bite. The conference room at the Briar Glen Civic Center was designed to be neutral. The walls were a bland, inoffensive beige, the carpet a generic industrial gray, and the long oval table was made of a synthetic wood that looked expensive from a distance but felt hollow when you knocked on it. It was a room where zoning disputes were settled and budget committees argued over the price of asphalt. Today, it was the site of my reckoning. I arrived at 9:45 in the morning. The sky outside was a sheet of relentless steel gray, threatening snow. Denise walked on my left, carrying a briefcase that contained the physical copies of every lie I had uncovered. Calvin walked on my right, looking less like a journalist and more like a bodyguard, his eyes scanning the hallway, and between us, moving slowly but under her own power. Was my mother? Elaine Hayes had insisted on coming. She was pale, her skin looking almost translucent under the fluorescent lights of the hallway. And she leaned heavily on a cane she had refused to use just a week ago, but her jaw was set. She had spent 30 years being silenced by fear. She was not going to let me finish this fight alone. We entered Room B. The opposition was already there. Preston Crown sat at the head of the table, flanked by 2 junior associates who looked like they had been cloned in a law school basement. Next to them sat 3 members of the Briar Glen Community Trust Board. They were men I recognized from the society pages. Bankers, real estate moguls, pillars of the community. They looked uncomfortable. They were used to gala dinners and ribbon cuttings, not depositions in municipal basements. Grant Alden was not there yet. Neither was Martin. Crown stood up as we entered. His smile was tight, a masterful display of professional insincerity. Ms. Hayes, he said. Mrs. Hayes, I see you have brought a team. I did not smile back. I pulled out a chair for my mother, helping her sit. Then I sat directly across from Crown. We are here. Mr. Crown, I said. Where is the chairman? Mr. Alden is delayed, Crown said smoothly, but he has fully authorized me to speak on behalf of the trust and the board. We are here to find a constructive resolution to this misunderstanding. He opened a folder. The trust is prepared to be generous. Sarah, he began. We understand that you have uncovered some irregularities regarding the record-keeping of the former Larkspur Clinic. We acknowledge that the clerical standards of the 90s were not what they are today. Irregularities, I repeated. Is that what we are calling human trafficking now? Crown's eyes narrowed slightly. We are calling it a failure of documentation. However, in the interest of supporting one of our community's own, the trust has authorized me to offer you a comprehensive package. He slid a document across the table. It includes full reimbursement for your mother's medical care, past and future. He listed, it includes a substantial settlement for your personal distress, $500,000, and it includes a fully funded position for you as a consultant for the Trust's outreach program in, let us say, California. I looked at the paper. It was a bribe to leave town. And the condition? I asked. A standard confidentiality agreement, Crown said, waving his hand dismissively. You would simply agree that your findings were inconclusive and that you accept the official paternity record as it stands. I looked at the men on the board. They were studying the grain of the table, refusing to meet my eyes. You want me to sign a paper saying Martin Hayes is my father. I said, and that my mother is an adulteress. We want you to move on. Crown said, for everyone's sake. I picked up the document. The paper felt heavy, expensive. I looked at the number. $500,000. It was enough to buy a house. It was enough to start over. I tore the document in half. The sound was loud in the quiet room. I tore it again and again. I let the pieces flutter down onto the fake wood table like confetti. I do not want your money, I said. My voice was steady, surprising even me. I do not want your job, and I definitely do not want your consulting fee. I signaled to Denise. She opened the briefcase and pulled out the ledger. It was the original copy Mara had given us. The edges frayed, the paper yellowed. I slid it across the table toward Crown. I want the truth. I said, this is the internal billing ledger from Larkspur, dated 1993. It lists the donor codes, it lists the payments from the trust, and it lists the names of the men who provided the biological material for the so-called legacy tier. Crown did not touch the ledger. He looked at it as if it were radioactive. This is stolen property, he said coldly. It is evidence, I said, and I have copies, digital copies, physical copies, copies with people you cannot threaten and lawyers you cannot buy. I stood up, leaning over the table. I know about the deal. I said to the board members, I know that Martin Hayes saved Grant Alden from an SEC investigation in 1992. I know the trust was used to launder the money, and I know that my conception was part of the payoff. The door to the conference room banged open. We all turned. Martin Hayes stood in the doorway. He was wearing his camel hair coat, damp from the snow. His face was flushed, his eyes wild. He looked from me to Crown, and then his gaze landed on Elaine. Elaine. He barked, "Get up! We are leaving!" My mother did not move. She gripped the handle of her cane until her knuckles were white. "I am not going anywhere." "Martin," she said. Her voice was thin, but it held a note of steel I had never heard before. Martin strode into the room. He ignored the lawyers. He ignored the board. He walked straight to the table and slammed his hand down, inches from the torn settlement papers. "You are being manipulated," he shouted at her. "Sarah is twisting everything to hurt me. She is mentally unstable. She has always been obsessed with destroying this family because she knows she does not belong in it." I stood my ground. I did not flinch. "I do belong in it." "Martin," I said, "I belong in it more than you do, because I am the one who is actually related to the man who runs it." Martin whirled on me. "You shut your mouth," he hissed. "You ungrateful, spiteful little—" "Why did you hate me?" I asked. I cut him off, my voice rising. For 30 years, I asked myself that question. Why? Was I that ugly? Was I that annoying? But it wasn't me, was it? It was always you. Martin spat. "You were a constant reminder of her betrayal." "No," I said, "I wasn't a reminder of betrayal. I was a reminder of risk. I walked around the table so I was standing face to face with him. You didn't hate me because I was proof of an affair." I said, "You hated me because I was a liability. Every time you looked at me, you didn't see a child. You saw a breach of contract. You saw the talking evidence of the fraud you committed to save your own skin. You were terrified that one day I would have Grant Alden's nose, or his laugh, and someone with a calculator would figure out the dates." Martin's face twitched. "I protected you," he screamed. "I gave you a life. You gave me a cover story," I shouted back. Calvin stood up. He pulled a single sheet of paper from his jacket pocket. "This is a sworn affidavit from Mara Dorsey," Calvin said. His voice was calm, cutting through the shouting like a knife. "She was the billing coordinator at Larkspur in 1993. Martin froze. The name registered. Calvin began to read. "On February 14th, 1993, Martin Hayes met with the clinic director. He specifically requested that the conception records for his wife, Elaine Hayes, be coded in a way that would allow for plausible deniability. He instructed the staff to create a secondary, false paper trail suggesting that Mrs. Hayes had requested the procedure without his consent. using an unknown donor. He told the director, quote, "If this ever comes out, I need to be the victim. I need the leverage to ensure she never leaves." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum. I looked at my mother. She was staring at Martin. Her eyes were wide, filled with a horror that went beyond betrayal. "You asked them to do it?" she whispered. Martin did not answer. He was breathing hard, his chest heaving. "You told me I was crazy," Elaine said, her voice rising to a keen. "For years. You told me I had ruined your life. You made me beg for forgiveness for a sin I didn't commit. You held it over my head every single day. I stayed with you despite what you did. That is what you said." Elaine stood up. She wobbled. But she did not fall. "But you knew." She screamed. "You knew the whole time. You set it up." Martin took a step back. "It was a strategy. Elaine, to protect the assets. If the SEC found out about the deal with Grant, we would have lost the house. We would have lost everything. I had to have a story that explained why I was raising another man's child without admitting to the payoff. So you sacrificed me," she said. "You sacrificed your wife and your daughter to protect your money. I protected our reputation," Martin roared. "And look at you now, dragging it through the gutter. You are the gutter." "Martin," I said. Preston Crown stood up. He looked pale. "This mediation is over," he said. "We will not be party to—" "Sit down." "Preston." The voice came from the back of the room. It was deep, resonant, and commanded instant obedience. Grant Alden walked in. He was wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than the building we were standing in. He looked impeccable. He looked regal. But there was a tightness around his eyes that hadn't been there at the gala. He walked to the head of the table. The board members practically scrambled out of their chairs to make room for him. Grant sat down. He looked at Martin, then at me. "So," he said, "the prodigal daughter returns." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had sold his genetics like premium bonds. "I am not your daughter," I said. "I am just another one of your investments that went bad." Grant chuckled. It was the laugh Elaine had heard in the hallway. "You have your mother's fire," he said, "and my chin. It is a dangerous combination." He looked at the ledger on the table. "You think this scares me?" he asked. "A few old papers? I own the police chief. Sarah, I own the judges. This will never see the inside of a courtroom. You are playing a game you do not understand. I am not playing a game." "Grant," I said. I looked at Calvin. Calvin pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen once. "It is done," Calvin said. "What is done?" Grant asked. "Board. The file." Calvin said, "The ledger, Mara's affidavit, the DNA results, the board minutes from 1992 showing the debt restructuring. I just sent it all." "Sent it where?" Crown demanded. "The Boston Globe." Calvin listed, "The New York Times, the State Attorney General's office, the Massachusetts Medical Board, and, just for good measure, the FBI's Financial Crimes Division." Grant went still. The arrogance didn't vanish, but it froze. "You are bluffing," he said. "Check your email." "Grant," I said. Grant pulled out his phone. He scrolled. His face went from healthy pink to ash gray in the span of 3 seconds. "You little bitch," he whispered. "Do not talk to her like that." The shout came from the hallway. A woman burst into the room. She was wearing a fur coat over a yoga outfit. Her hair was perfectly blonde, but her face was streaked with mascara. It was Mrs. Alden, Grant's wife. She walked straight up to Grant. "Is it true?" she demanded. Grant stood up. "Margaret, not here. Go to the car. Claire called me. She screamed. She told me everything. She told me about the children. She told me about the clinic. Is it true?" Grant looked at her. He looked at the room full of witnesses. He looked at me. It was business. "Margaret," he said, "it was legacy. We needed to ensure that the right families—" Slap. The sound was sharp and shocking. Mrs. Alden had slapped Grant Alden across the face. "You are sick," she sobbed. "You are absolutely sick." She turned to me. She looked at me for a long moment. She looked at the features I shared with her husband. I am sorry, she whispered. Then she turned and walked out. Grant stood there, his cheek turning red. The king of Briar Glen had been struck in front of his subjects. He looked at the board members. They were all looking at their phones, reading the news alerts that were starting to ping. Gentlemen, Grant said, his voice shaking, we need to formulate a response. There is no response. Grant, one of the board members said quietly. It is over. Grant looked at Martin. You fix this, he shouted at Martin. You were supposed to fix this. You said she was under control. I tried, Martin shouted back. She is insane. The room descended into chaos. The lawyers were shouting into their phones. The board members were trying to leave. Grant was yelling at Martin. I stood in the middle of it, feeling strangely calm. It was done. The bomb had detonated. The facade was gone. I walked over to my mother. Let's go. Mom, I said. She nodded. I helped her stand. Martin saw us moving toward the door. He broke away from Grant and ran toward us. Sarah, he yelled. I stopped. I turned to look at him one last time. You think you won? He sneered. You think this makes you happy? You have destroyed your own inheritance. You have destroyed your mother's reputation. You will have nothing. I looked at him. I looked at the small, panic-stricken man who had terrified me for 33 years. I have the truth. Martin, I said, and that is worth more than anything you could ever leave me. I turned my back on him. We walked out of the conference room. We walked down the long, beige hallway. We walked out the double doors and into the cold, clean air of the parking lot. The snow had started to fall, big, soft flakes that melted on the pavement. Denise and Calvin were waiting by the car. They looked exhausted but triumphant. We did it, Calvin said. He held up his phone. The Globe just posted the headline. The Briar Glen baby ring. Corruption, coercion, and the secret children of the elite. It is over, Denise said. I helped my mother into the passenger seat of the car. She sat back, closing her eyes. She looked tired, but the tension that had defined her face for decades was gone. Sarah, she said softly. Yes. Mom, I am sorry, she said. I am so sorry. I should have fought for you. I should have left him the day you were born. I was so afraid of being poor. I was so afraid of being alone. You aren't alone now, I said. She reached out and took my hand. She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw only love, no guilt, no fear, just a mother looking at her daughter. You are so brave, she said. You are nothing like him. You are nothing like either of them. I looked up at the sky. The snow was falling faster now, covering the gray asphalt in a blanket of white. I thought about the DNA test. I thought about the percentage points and the heritage markers. I thought about Grant Alden's chin and Martin Hayes's name. They had both tried to own me. One had sold me, and the other had bought me. They had treated me like a product, a liability, a piece of leverage in their game of power. But standing there in the cold, I realized something. Biology is just code. It is just instructions. It doesn't tell you who you are. I wasn't an affair child. I wasn't a clinic baby. I wasn't a Hayes. And I certainly wasn't an Alden. I was Sarah. I squeezed my mother's hand. Let's go home. Mom, I said, not to the big house, to Denise's, to somewhere real. I got into the driver's seat. I started the engine. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I looked in the rearview mirror. I saw Martin and Grant storming out of the building, arguing, surrounded by lawyers. They looked small. They looked like ants fighting over a crumb. I turned the corner and the Civic Center disappeared from view. I didn't look back. I had a life to build, and for the first time in 33 years, it was going to be mine. Thank you for listening to Sarah's story. It is a heavy journey, isn't it? The weight of family secrets can crush you, or it can forge you into something unbreakable. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Are you in a big city like Philadelphia? Or a small town with secrets of its own like Briar Glen? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Revenge Stories. We have many more tales of justice, retribution, and the uncovering of truth coming your way. Share your thoughts on Sarah's decision. Did she do the right thing by burning it all down? I read every comment. Until next time.